Before dying at just 19, he wrote something the world wasn't ready to read. Not then, not in the chaos of war. It was hidden, buried, forgotten. His last words weren't meant to be found. And yet, decades later, they were. And when I read them, it felt like the paper was still warm, like he was still there, speaking through time. He didn't ask to be remembered. But once you hear what he wrote, you will never forget him. This is not just a story about war. It's about silence. About being young, invisible, and still choosing to matter. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't count, this is for you. Because this letter, it was written for someone like you. Before we continue, take a breath. If something in, you already felt this. If you know what it's like to give everything and still be overlooked, then you're not here by accident. And if you're not just watching this, but feeling it, then do one thing that brings this story to more people. Click subscribe, not for a number, not for a channel, but for Daniel, for every voice that was silenced and deserves to be heard again. Every new subscriber is one more echo that says, he mattered, I care, I remember. So now, click, and let's bring his voice back to life. Together. Now we begin. Have you ever held a piece of paper that felt heavier than the world? It was just a letter, folded, yellowed, edges soft from time. But in my hands, it felt like it was still breathing. The ink had faded, but the words still burned. To whoever finds this, I'm 19. I know I won't make it, but if you're reading this, it means I did my part. It wasn't signed with a full name, just Daniel, 1944. I read it again, and again. Because once you hear a voice like that, a boy, still a boy, writing from the edge of death, you can't unhear it. He didn't write about war. He wrote about love, about regret, about his mother's hands, about the sound of rain on a metal roof, about how, even in hell, he still believed in something better. And as I read, I kept thinking, who was he? Why did no one tell me this part? Of the war, why did no one ever say that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come in silence? And so I began searching for the boy who knew he'd die and still wrote this. His name was Daniel Émile Rousseau, born in 1925 in a village so small it barely had a name, nestled between the hills of southern France near the Rhône. He wasn't a soldier. Not really. Not yet. He was the boy who fixed his neighbor's fence, the boy who played violin on Sundays at Mass, the boy who used to carve birds out of olive wood just to make his little sister laugh. He was tender, curious, and too smart for the life that waited for him. His father had died in the First War, gassed in the trenches of Verdun. His mother never remarried. She ran a small bakery, and Daniel woke every morning at 4 a.m. to knead dough with her, shoulder to shoulder, before going to school. He was just 14 when the Germans marched into Paris. And even in their distant village, you could feel it. The way the air changed, the way men stopped speaking out loud, the way mothers started to pray more and sleep less. By 17, Daniel had already started listening to the whispers, to the rumors of resistance, to the teachers who suddenly disappeared, to the trains passing in the night. He knew something was wrong, but like many boys, he didn't know what to do about it. Not yet. What he did know was that he wouldn't wait. He didn't tell his mother when he left. He folded his clothes neatly on the bed, wrote a note that said only, "I have to try," and walked into the mountains. That's where the Maquis found him, the rural French resistance. They didn't want him at first, too young, too soft, too polite. But then he stole a German map from an occupied post office, and something changed. They made him a runner, messages, radios, codes. He never carried a weapon, just names, numbers, and secrets. They called him Le Moineau, the Sparrow, small, fast, and always watching, and he never once got caught. But In 1944, everything changed. Operation Overlord, D-Day, was coming, and the resistance was tasked with something critical: cutting the supply lines before the Allies hit the beaches. Daniel was chosen for a mission that no one expected him to return from. A message had to be delivered to a contact inside a German-controlled rail depot. Not far, maybe 12 kilometers, but through open terrain, past checkpoints, and into a town crawling with SS. They didn't pick him because he was expendable. They picked him because he was the only one they trusted to make it. He accepted the mission with no questions. But before he left, he asked for paper and time. They gave him 20 minutes. He sat under a tree and he wrote. Not fast, not with panic, with purpose. Maybe he knew, maybe not. But when you read that letter, you feel it. I am not afraid to die. What I fear is being forgotten, that you won't know what I loved, that no one will remember the girl I kissed once behind the schoolhouse, or how the stars looked the night before the soldiers came, that someone will find my body and think I was just another number. I'm writing this so you know I was real, and you believe him, because the words don't feel like the end of something. They feel like the beginning of something bigger. They say he was last seen crossing the field before the depot. No one saw him fall. No body was recovered. Only the letter, stuffed into a metal cartridge, wrapped in twine, and tucked into the roots of the same tree he wrote beneath. Just in case. A farmer found it 20 years later, digging up soil for a vineyard. He didn't know what it was. Just old paper, but he gave it to his daughter, and she wept. Because sometimes a letter from a dead boy can feel more alive than anything you've ever known. And now, you know who he was. Not just a name, not just a soldier, a son, a brother, a dreamer, a sparrow in the storm. And in the next chapter, you'll walk with him through the last mission he ever took. The air was too still that morning. It wasn't raining, but the sky felt heavy, like it might, like it knew. Daniel rose before dawn, as always. But this time, he didn't make bread. He packed only what he needed: a compass, a strip of cloth torn from his mother's apron, a small pencil, and the message, folded into a capsule, wax-sealed. It was no bigger than a matchbox. He tied it under his shirt with a piece of string, tight enough not to move if he ran, loose enough to breathe. He didn't eat. He couldn't. His stomach was all knots, but his hands, they were steady, almost too steady. That's how he knew. That's how you know. When the fear leaves, when your body stops shaking, not because you're calm, but because you've accepted it. He stepped out into the first light. The resistance safe house was still asleep, or pretending to be. Only one man watched him from the shadows. An old fighter named Marcel. He had no medals, no family, and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't say goodbye. He just pressed a hand to Daniel's shoulder and whispered, "Don't run fast. Run true." Then he handed him something, a small wooden bird, a sparrow. Daniel had carved it for Marcel's grandson, who died last winter. Now it was being returned. Daniel left on foot, no bike, no disguise. Just himself. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Every leaf crackled like it was shouting. Every step was a question, but Daniel didn't hesitate. He had studied the route for weeks. Every hedge, every ditch, every dog that barked on the wrong side of the fence. This wasn't bravery, this was calculation, precision, practice. But even the best plan can't stop a bullet. And Daniel knew that. He moved through the woods for an hour, keeping to the shadows. At one point he froze. A patrol truck rattled down the gravel road just meters from him. He could see the mud on their boots, hear them laughing. One of them stopped, lit a cigarette, turned toward the trees. Daniel didn't breathe, not for 10 seconds, not for 20. He waited and waited, until the man flicked the cigarette and walked on. That's when Daniel ran. The town he had to reach was called Montreval, a sleepy farming village taken over by the Wehrmacht 2 weeks prior. It was a critical rail link between Lyon and the coast. And the Nazis were flooding it with troops in preparation for the Allied invasion. If the resistance could sabotage it, even for one night, it could save thousands of Allied lives. But the message Daniel carried wasn't a plan. It was a signal, one single word, a word that meant go. If it reached the contact inside, the explosives hidden beneath the rail bridge would detonate within the hour. But that also meant every German checkpoint would be watching. Daniel approached the village from the east. He changed clothes behind. An abandoned barn, put on a cap, tucked the wooden bird into his pocket. He looked ordinary, forgettable. That was his best weapon. He reached the outskirts of the village by late afternoon. Children played in silence. Shutters closed behind him. The tension was thick. He passed a group of German officers. One of them looked at him too long. Daniel gave a quick nod, kept walking. Each step closer to the contact point felt like a countdown, but then he saw her. Her name was Sophie. She ran the apothecary. At least that's what the Germans thought, but the resistance knew her as Marianne, a code name chosen for France itself. Daniel stepped into her shop like a regular customer. She didn't look up. He placed a coin on the counter. Then another, 3 coins, their signal. She finally met his eyes, and for just a second she looked afraid. Then she nodded. She motioned to a shelf. Daniel walked over, pretended to examine a jar, slipped the capsule behind the 4th bottle on the left. It's done, he thought, but it wasn't. As he turned to leave, the door burst open. 2 German soldiers entered. One spoke in clipped, barking German, demanded to search the back. Sophie's hand trembled, just barely. Daniel kept his face neutral. The other soldier turned to Daniel. Your papers. Daniel handed over forged documents. The soldier read them too slowly. Where are you coming from? Daniel answered. Rehearsed, casual, visiting family in Saint-Martin. The soldier narrowed his eyes. You have a receipt for that hat. Daniel almost smiled. No, it was a gift. Silence, then a grunt, a shrug, and they left. Daniel exhaled only after the door clicked shut. Sophie stared at him for a long time, then whispered, I hope you wrote to someone. He nodded. I did. Then he stepped into the dusk and vanished into the trees. In the next chapter, you'll read the letter he left behind, word for word. The words of a boy who walked into death, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to whoever. Finds this, that's how it begins. No name, no title, just the quiet voice of a 19-year-old who knows he won't see the sun rise twice. His handwriting is neat, not rushed, like he wanted each word to survive even if he didn't. And what follows is not strategy or bitterness or blame. It's love, it's memory, it's everything a young man wants the world to remember about being alive. He writes about his sister's laugh and the way the wind moved the curtains in his room when it stormed. He writes about his mother's hands, how they smelled like yeast and lavender, and how he never told her that baking with her was his favorite part of childhood. He writes about the girl he kissed once in the orchard when he was 15, and how he never forgot the taste of apples and fear. But mostly, he writes about what it means to choose something bigger than yourself. I'm not brave, he says. I'm just someone who couldn't stand to watch anymore. He doesn't mention the mission, doesn't say what town or what bridge. He protects everyone, even as he lets himself go. If this letter survives me, he writes, don't let it become a relic, let it become a reason to speak, to act, to care, even when it hurts. His final words aren't dramatic, they're simple. Tell my mother I wasn't afraid. Tell the others I didn't run. And then there's a space, a blank line, like a breath that was never taken. Because sometimes the last thing you write is the last thing that can still save someone. No one saw him fall. There were no witnesses, no final scream, no cinematic last stand, just silence. The kind of silence that seeps into the soil and stays there. Daniel was never heard from again after that mission. Some say he made it back to the forest and was shot by a sniper hidden in the trees. Others believe he was captured, interrogated, and executed in secret. His body dumped where no one would find it. There's even a rumor that he was taken alive and died in a train bound for Germany, nameless among hundreds of others, curled in darkness, clutching the wooden bird he carved as a boy. But the truth? The truth is, no one knows. All that remained was the letter, buried beneath that old tree, tucked away in wax and hope. The message he delivered triggered the demolition. The bridge exploded exactly 56 minutes after the capsule was placed in Sophie's shop. That one act, one word, delayed an entire German division for almost 48 hours. Hundreds of Allied lives were spared, and no one ever knew why. The resistance celebrated a small, bitter victory, a mission marked successful in a coded transmission. But among the men who waited that night in the forest, there was an empty space, a pair of boots left by the fire, a silence that swallowed every laugh. Marcel never said Daniel's name again, not because he forgot, but because remembering it out loud felt too holy. Daniel's mother never received a telegram, no official notice. She just kept baking bread every morning before dawn, as if he might walk in and ask for a slice, but he didn't. And that's how the boy who saved a bridge disappeared. No body, no grave, just a ghost carried by rumor and wind. And for 20 years the world moved on. Tanks rusted, generals wrote books, statues were built for men who survived. And Daniel was folded away, like his letter, into the quiet corners of memory, until the vineyard, until a farmer's shovel struck something solid in the earth, not bone, not metal, paper wrapped in oilcloth, preserved by soil, sealed from time, and suddenly the silence cracked open. It could have stayed buried forever. Another lost message in a century of forgotten noise. But fate, or maybe memory, has strange ways of returning what matters. The farmer's name was Jacques. He wasn't a historian. He wasn't even curious at first. He was just digging a trench for new irrigation pipes in 1964, just outside Montreval, when his spade hit something that wasn't rock. When he pulled it out, it looked like trash. A small bundle wrapped in oily cloth and sealed with wax. He was about to throw it away. But his daughter, Elise, 12 years old and curious like only children can be, asked to open it. Inside was the past, still breathing. The paper was delicate, browned by time, but the ink had held. So had the words. They weren't written for her, but somehow they felt like they were. That night, Elise read the letter out loud at the dinner table. Her voice trembled because even at 12 she could feel it, the weight of someone else's last breath landing in her lungs. Her father listened without a word. Her mother cried, and something in that small kitchen changed. The next day, Jacques took the letter to the village archivist, then to the mayor, then to a man from Lyon who specialized in resistance artifacts. None of them could explain why it was there. The depot explosion in 1944 had been documented, yes, but only as an anonymous act of sabotage. No names, no heroes, just results. For 2 decades, no one had even known there'd been a messenger. Daniel Émile Rousseau had vanished so completely. It was like he'd never existed. Until now. They traced the handwriting, matched the dates, dug through half-burned SOE files, resistance rosters, field reports. It took months, but then someone remembered. An old man named Marcel. He was dying in a hospice, hands too weak to hold a spoon. But when they read the letter aloud to him, he whispered one word, Sparrow. And he wept, not like a soldier, like a father, like someone who had carried a ghost too long. Marcel confirmed it. Daniel had existed, he had volunteered, he had saved them, and no one had ever spoken his name. That changed everything. The letter was published in Le Monde, then picked up by BBC Radio. A memorial was erected outside Montreval, not far from the old depot ruins. It read, "To the one who ran true." But more than that, it reached people. Veterans wrote in, mothers, teachers, survivors who had been saved by the very delay Daniel helped cause. One woman said her husband survived Omaha Beach because reinforcements didn't arrive on time. A man in Canada found the name Rousseau in his grandfather's war journal, written beside the words, "Young boy, brave eyes." The ripples were everywhere and always had been. We just hadn't seen them. But perhaps the most important reaction came from a woman in Marseille. She was 79 years old, living alone. Her name, Claire Rousseau, Daniel's little sister. She had believed her brother died in a prison somewhere, or maybe escaped to England. No one ever told her the truth. When the archivist knocked on her door with a copy of the letter, she didn't speak. She just reached for it with both hands and pressed it to her chest like a heartbeat she thought she'd lost forever. She read it aloud only once, and then, in a whisper, said, "He wasn't forgotten." She died 2 years later, but not before donating the original letter to a small museum dedicated to resistance fighters in Lyon. She asked for no ceremony, just that his story be told, not as a tragedy, but as proof. Proof that even the smallest voice can echo across time, and that's what remained. Not his body, not his photograph, just ink and truth. And the undeniable fact that somewhere, a 19-year-old boy decided to face death alone, not because he wanted to be remembered, but because someone needed to do it. And in that act, he became unforgettable. They never built a statue of him. There's no school named Daniel Émile Rousseau. No government speech, no medal on display. He's not in the textbooks. But if you walk through Montreval at dusk and the wind brushes the tall grass just right, you might hear him. Not in words, in the silence between them, because the legacy of a boy like Daniel isn't made of marble or metal. It's made of breath, of blood, of the quiet decision to stand, when running would have been easier. And maybe that's why this story matters, because it's not really about Daniel, it's about us, about the part of you that knows what it's like to be invisible, to be young and afraid, and still move forward, to love something or someone so deeply, you'd risk being forgotten just to protect it. It's about the battles we fight that no one sees, the messages we carry in secret, the truth we hide in our chest, hoping the world will understand someday. Maybe you've never worn a uniform. Maybe you've never crossed a border with a mission. But maybe, just maybe, you know what it feels like to walk into the unknown with nothing but your name and a hope. Daniel was 19. He knew he'd die. And still, he wrote that letter. Still, he delivered it. Still, he chose to matter, not in glory, but in sacrifice. And now that letter has reached you. So don't let it end here. Don't scroll past it like just another story in a world overflowing with noise. This isn't noise, this is memory. This is the heartbeat of a boy who refused to be erased. And if it moved you, even a little, then share it, comment his name, keep it alive. Because every time someone remembers Daniel, every time someone chooses courage over comfort, he wins again. We're not just telling history, we're repairing it. And now that you know his story, what will you do with it? Like, share, subscribe, not for numbers, for memory, for Daniel. We'll see you in the next one.